Hello, everybody. Glad to see many Ember Europe friends again. Uh, Today, I'm doing a quick demo and discussion of the Embroider template tag code mod. Pretty excited about this. It was the thing we were able to put together by building on a lot of the effort that has come before in making Embroider able to understand all the traditional app patterns and all of the possible crazy things your add-ons do, et cetera, et cetera. Really culminating in a way to get yourself to leap ahead in terms of the features your apps are using and how easy they'll be to work on. So this is the package, Embroider template tag code mod. One might ask why it's an Embroider thing, and because like Embroider is a build tool, this is a code mod. They're kind of different, and they are kind of different, but the things you need to do to convert all your existing Ember apps to template tag, the hard part of it really is understanding the graph of dependencies in your application, right? In order to use template tag, you actually import the components you're calling and the helpers you're calling, and you figure out what add-on they come from, and you have to actually find them. And figuring all of that out is like what we made Embroider to do, right? So we actually had all of this nice infrastructure for processing classic add-ons, discovering everything in them, finding all the things in your app, settling the disputes between whose file is going to win on every case, and being able to answer questions like, if you call a component with this name, where does it come from? So Embroider had that infrastructure, and we were able to turn it. And now that template tag itself, as a user-facing format, is really ready to go, it made total sense to turn it into a code mod. So let's do. We're gonna do some demoing. I'm gonna use crates.io app as the target to code mod, because it's an open source Ember app. It's in pretty good shape. It's the front end for all the crates repository. There's going to be a caveat on this one, which is that it uses Ember CSS modules, which doesn't actually work with template tag. So like the runtime of this would still have style problems if we were to actually try to use this code mod and land the changes. But I wanted to use like a realistic app that's not my code to really put the code mod through its paces so we could see what it does and we could see what the options do. More coming very soon on Ember CSS modules. When I mentioned that to Chris, he said, oh, actually, we have a Mainmatter blog post about that tomorrow. So people are working on that particular challenge. I actually got really close to actually making it work just for the purposes of this demo. But in the 2 hours I gave myself to spike it, I got most of the way. If I had another couple, I probably could make Ember CSS modules work. So let's, when we look at the docs here for the template, the code mod, the instructions tell you to figure out what options you want to pass and ensure your app has the prerequisites. I'd split to the prerequisites because basically the issue here is just like, we're going to create a bunch of GJS files in your app, so you better be ready for GJS files. Everybody should be able to do that. Like GJS works all the way down to Ember 3.27. And depending on what build tool you're on, it's going to change how you get access to that. Mostly people are going to add Ember template imports add-on, and that gives you the support in the build for it. If you're onto the Embroider Core 4 alphas, it's just natively supported and you don't need an add-on. So we need that. And the other things I'm going to make sure that are just present in this app is Prettier and ESLint support for template tag, just so they don't get in our way. So I did a little branch here that just has those changes. So I made a Prettier RC that refers to the Prettier plugin, and I grabbed the stock ESLint out of the newest Ember app blueprint, just because it has support already for template tag. So I have these little changes here. I guess I'll make my branch to work on code modding stuff. Give it a new name, code mod 2, just to keep these things out of our way. So this is going to give me, this is just so that when I make a bunch of GJS files, we can actually lint them and format them and they won't be full of red squiggles. So GJS support. All right, so let's go ahead and just run the code mod the first time. This one's going to crash. And I just want to point out what's
Ed,
going on.
could you zoom in just a teeny bit?
Sure,
So
yeah,
the
glad you asked.
recording
I
would
meant
have
to
a bit
ask
more.
that. How's this? A little better.
Yeah, that's a lot better. Thanks.
At my edge and then yeah. Okay, so so the first time I tried to run this, I get a crash, and this is just because I wanted to point out the kind of limits of what might stop you with the code mod. We get this build error called Broccoli Bridge placeholder modules never fulfilled. So if we go find where this is, it's in Ember CSS modules, and that add-on is just fighting valiantly to pipe a bunch of state through the classic Broccoli graph in a way that's just not going to be supported by the pre-build that we're trying to do here. So the pre-build step here is the same one that Embroider does before building your app. It needs to take all of your classic add-on and actually run whatever custom Broccoli code they have to figure out what files they really contain. So the nice thing about code mods, though, is if there's build time stuff that's problematic, you just take it out. So I'm just going to delete Ember CSS modules from my package JSON. Now, of course, I won't have style support in the app while that's gone, but my code mod doesn't care and can run past it now. This is the only one I know of that completely crashes the build. I think SAS maybe also. They do these kind of very, very cursed things in the Broccoli pipeline. So the code mod ran successfully now, actually, and didn't complain about a single file, which is pretty nice. So it has, by default, processed everything. So that means all of the handlebars files that were components, all the handlebars files that were route, and also each of your rendering tests that were doing rendering can be converted to GJS. So let's take a look at some of the output we got. Oh, the other thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to run prettier because the code mod doesn't try to do styling. And we want to make sure we have nice styles on our new files. So, all right. So here was a component. So the deleted files have a JavaScript and an HPS that are separate here. Here's the GJS that got generated for them. It all worked. We've got, and notice that neither of the old files, right? We had the handlebars just referring to global component drop down here, and we had a JavaScript file that just imports service and component, but our combined one actually does know how to import all those dependencies. We've got a drop-down component being imported from within our app. We've also got an SVG jar helper being imported from an add-on, EQ from an add-on, and some standard ones from Ember. And the code mod figured that all out correctly and got them all in here. That's an example of a component. Of course, some components will have been template only before. They are going to get converted just the same. Let's see, I probably have one. There's one that didn't have no, not have JS2. Here we are, edition, yeah. All right, this one was template only. There was no JavaScript file, right? So this one ends up simpler. There's no class in the GJS version because you don't have to have one. So this one, it just became it's quite close now, actually, to what the original HPS was, just the span with the content. Here we just have our template tag around the span and the necessary import because we're calling a component. So the code mod worked. That's all great. Let's take a look at a route template like application HPS, which became application GJS. Just like the template only examples, we've got a template tag now. So this is the first spot where we actually have to think about what is supported on our Ember version. The code mod by default tries to go for the most future-proof thing, the most nice, feature-looking format. You might be asking, like, does this actually work? Are you allowed to do that with a route template? And you are starting at Ember 6.3. This app's on 6.0 or something like that. So this won't run. And there's the different option we would need on the code mod. So this ability to use native route templates is a thing that's added later. And if you don't have support for it natively, we can pass a different option to the code mod and use an add-on for that instead. So I'm going to revert my code mod. I'm going to run it again with the option native route templates false. And I'll run my prettier again. Now we'll go back to application GJS. And this is now using the Ember route template add-on instead. So point being that you can use this code mod even if you're on Ember versions that don't have support for every last feature. You're just going to need some different flags to the code mod. So Ember route template add-on is really just probably filling that kind of same behavior. So we've got a now we have export default route template wrapping our component, and then this makes it work on pretty much all Ember versions. Another thing to point out here, in both versions, the application HPS file had references to this, and in a route template, this is the controller, right? After the code mod has run, those have become at controller because this is now a component that gets passed to the controller. Right? So the code mod is wiring all that stuff up correctly. So that and once the big benefit of getting everything onto GJS is that it's especially strong for TypeScript users, but I was going to say include users because everything that's being imported now there's no global lookup of it ever anywhere, right? You don't need you don't have to go down all of the extra work of declaring global type registries and things like that. So it's really nice to have even your route templates all statically imported like this. It's actually a pretty big win in the build itself. I mentioned that this kind of lookup of figuring out where all your stuff comes from is something that Embroider has to do. That means if you're using Embroider today and you don't have template tag, we're figuring that all out every time we build your application and every time we rebuild your application. But if you use this code mod or convert stuff to GJS any other way, that's all work that doesn't have to happen ever again in the build. And so your build is much streamlined. There's very little work for us to do to build this stuff because we know where everything comes from. It's all statically visible. So it can be a significant performance win, especially if you have a huge number of components in an Embroider app and you run the code mod, you can get a much faster build. So let's look at, so we've looked at components and route templates. Let's also look at some tests because, let's see, I have a note on which one has some examples in it. Let's look at create row test. Yeah, create row test. So this is a rendering test. It was previously a very standard looking test that did things like render HPS backticks, right? And so this is, of course, loose handlebars. This is a global lookup of that component. And you don't have access really to stuff that's going on in the local scope here. But it's been code modded to template tags. So we've got await render template create row. And just like in the other cases, now this is an actual importable component. So if you think about this in the context of tests, this is quite nice. Now, if you really wanted to make one component that you're just going to use in the test, instead of kind of call a register for it and confusing TypeScript or Glint and confusing the Embroider build, you can just make a component here, right? If I'm just like class example extends component, right? I can just call that, right? And it's really nice for tests to be able to do one-off stuff like that, or call a helper or whatever, or even make it template only like this. So all these examples would just work now in my test. I brought up this particular example because it does have another example of a thing that's supported on the newest Ember versions, and it might not be supported on yours. So we have another flag for in the code mod, and that is the use of the lexically scoped this here. Right, in a class-based component, the this refers to its own this, right? But in a template-only component like this, there is no this for the component itself. It doesn't have one. So it's actually kind of nice to refer to the outer scope, which is what this old test was doing. This test here was in fact in this model of test, the this that was passed to the handlebars template here was the test's own this, like this same this out here in JavaScript. This is intended to work the same way, where we have access to the crate. So this right here, right? This dot crate equals, that's supposed to be the same here. This doesn't work until Ember 6.4. It was added as a feature to allow lexical this to come through. So we do have a flag for that in the code mod as well to work around not having it. Let's run the code mod again. native lexical this equals false. Prettier. And, oh, I had it open, so let me reopen it from the test. There we go. Okay, here's what the code mod did as a workaround. It just gave us a different name for the binding because this is special. Up until Ember 6.4, you can't use the this way. And now, so this is just another example of the kind of the flags to be aware of. You want to use the code mod right away before you've upgraded Ember to the very latest thing. This one in particular being not until 6.4, which is not even a full stable release yet, right? It's like a beta right now. So these are also they're options because you can decide what order to do stuff. If the existence of an extra const self equals this in many of your tests is annoying to you, you could decide that you're going to upgrade Ember first and then use the code mod. If you can't upgrade Ember first and you want to use the code mod, you can get this extra workaround. That's the general strategy we took on the options on the code mod, is that you can pass no options and get the really feature-oriented thing, or you could use other options to back it down and get wider version support. Once you have your tests in this kind of template tag format, there wasn't really a reason, right? If you were authoring this test from scratch, you wouldn't have bothered to assign the crate to this anyway, right? You can just keep it as a local variable and use it directly, and that's even nicer, and it works better with the TypeScript and everything. So, but the point of the code mod isn't that you don't have to touch all this stuff. You can just run it and keep all your old ones working. Let's see, there's definitely a few other flags. A big one for people who are on the classic build and not on Embroider is by default, the code mod does use relative paths for things in your app, and it gives them extensions. And that is not a thing that the classic build really likes. So it works fine if you're already on Embroider. It doesn't work on the classic build. There's a flag to use more like traditional Ember app imports here, where it would be like your app name / component / crate row. The code mod can do that as well. That's another example. And there's a couple stylistic choices in the settings that are not really strictly correctness things. But for example, we look at a component with a class. By default, it's going to stick the template inside the class at the beginning, but you can put it at the end instead if you want to. That's just a style choice. I don't know if the community's really landed on a strong convention there yet. Happy to debate which one should be default. I don't have a strong opinion there. There's also support for TypeScript. So if you have components written as TS and HVS, and we're bringing those together into GTS, the code mod does handle the typing and things. And there's options in terms of how you'd like it to spell the types for some of the things that are ambiguous. You can decide, there's a default format option that's important to you if you're using TypeScript, which is this one. Basically, because the code mod follows the format you have. So if you have a JS file, it's going to become a GJS file. And if you have a TS file, it's going to become a GTS file. But there are cases that are ambiguous where you have just an HPS, and we want to know, is this going to become TypeScript or not? And that's what this default format handles. So by default, we got JavaScript. But if we say the default is actually GTS, then it will take things like the route templates and make them be TypeScript. And you won't always be able to infer all the typing information. You're going to be left with some blank types for you to fill in, and there's options around how you want those spelled to make it as easy as possible. So once you're happy with having run the code mod and getting your stuff working and your tests are passing and all, and as I said, I'm not doing the runtime side of these here because this app has an add-on that I'm going to break all the styling because and it's not the code mod's fault, it's the fact that the add-on doesn't work with GJS at all. We're really close there on that one. But once we've got the changes we want, actually, so in this case, this was my change to take out the add-on Ember.js modules. I'm going to take that one out for now because that's not part of my code mod run. So here's my code mod run with a bunch of changes. I am gonna make a commit, ran the code mod, and then the last thing the code mod offers is the ability to do a history merge. So let's run that. So I'm gonna pass, I'm gonna call the code mod with the argument merge history, and I'm gonna give it 2 branch names, like where did I start from and where am I going to? And so basically before the code mod and after the code mod. And it's gonna produce a new branch for me. Okay, so output branch temp, okay, I already tested this, of course. Let me allow overwrite so it will stomp that branch. So this is going through and making sure that all of the history of our multiple files that have been merged together follows them. So now let's check out the new branch that this just made for me. Right, it's going to have more than one commit for the code mod because it's going to do a few steps that allows Git to follow the history. But let's look at one of our components now. Let's see. Oh, I should run prettier. Oh, the other thing is I'm on this branch, of course, I don't have, did I have the prettier support? I do not. I had just taken the prettier support out. So this little squiggly here is just because I don't have, on this branch that I'm on, I do not have ESLint support for template tag. But those changes were all already made, so it's already formatted correctly. What I wanted to show is the actual history we get now. So we've got line by line history for all the JavaScript and the handlebars distinctly. So like the last person to touch this JavaScript was this commit. We can see the applied code mod line just for the template tag itself because that's the only place it came from. But even right before that, other lines in this template, they have like the actual commits that touch them last, right? Line by line. So that's a really nice feature that started, Boyd Malik started it. He really wanted that for his app. Also, some folks at Discourse also helped. And together we got all the ideas built into the tool itself. So you get this history. It is quite nice. And the reason you need this, right, is because your history came from 2 different files, the HPS file and the JS file. And if we did the naive thing, your Git's not going to be able to follow back to both of them. But we're able to make a combined version in the history that lets it follow both. And it's quite nice. So this particular view that I'm looking at, where everything really is tracing back and for the most part is not referring just to the code mod. This is using a Git feature that isn't always turned on by default on your system. So the code mod, when we ran the history merge, it created this file called git blame ignore revs. This is a Git feature that lets you list commits that are, like if you run a big formatter or white space change across your whole code base and you don't want that to constantly show up in your history, you can put that on this list. And this is just a list of commits. And it helps Git blame will then ignore it and skip past it to the previous real change. It's just a really nice Git feature. GitHub has it turned on by default. So the presence of this file will make your diffs on GitHub have a nice blame already. And to see it locally, there's a setting you turn on. It's the blame.ignorerevs file. It's not on by default. Without it, you would see the code mod all over the place because we changed the indentation of so many of the lines. And that's the last thing to touch the line. So that is my tour. Let's see. I think that was all the things I wanted to cover. So we could do questions, or Chris, if you want to keep questions to the end, we can move on to the next talk.
No, I'm happy to do questions now. We can, anybody who wants to hang out at the end anyway and just chat about stuff, that's
Cool.
kind of a different thing. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Yeah, I do have one. Is that all right? You hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Ed, you talked about Embroider Core version 4, if I'm correct,
Hmm.
but it's not released yet, is it?
No, it's an alpha right now, but it's quite close.
So do you recommend we migrate to this alpha version before running the code mod, or is it
No,
okay to run it
no, it's
on
fine.
V2?
It's fine to run it whenever. In fact, you could be on a totally classic build and run the code mod. It's honestly that's somewhat helpful to get you onto Embroider because once you have all template tag, Embroider has a lot less work to do figuring out all your components. So yeah, no, the thing that I mentioned was just how to make sure that your build can build GJS files, and that was the thing that changes at Embroider Core 4, where it just is built in, and before that, it's still the Ember template imports add-on.
Okay, so we'll be able to ditch Ember template imports with Embroider V4.
Yeah,
Okay, that's good
yeah,
news.
yeah. That's where you go to. That's where you go to Vite, right? And you use Vite's own build, and the set of plugins we've given you for Ember in Vite includes the template tag support.
Got another small question, if that's all right.
Fire
If
ahead.
we have in repo add-ons inside the app folder, the app lib folder, if I'm correct, will it convert it as well?
That is a really good question. I don't think it will go into those files to convert them because it's going to follow the default globs that apply to what files it's going to process. Let's do them actually. Um, so the thing that will work fine is that if you have components in any repo add-on, that won't matter. Like the Embroider resolver will find them just fine, and so they will get imported. They will be discovered and imported into the rest of your app just fine by name. If the in repo add-on has a name, I mean, it has to have a name. They'll be imported from its name, right? As if it was a real npm package. Um, the uh, the code mod has options for what files to process, and that's going to include globs of which files it's going to look at. And right by default, those are going to be things like app components, star.hps, and things like that. Okay. Because I didn't say at latest, so now you're doing something different. I thought that would make it faster, not slower. Surely that was the version it was already using anyway. All I'm trying to do is show you the help. But it has some globs for what files are processed, and those are not going to include the stuff in the add-on. Use in add-ons is a good question. Haven't exercised it very heavily. Not sure.
So, um, one of the things I showed in my little run through the Ember Initiative stuff is we ran this code mod on the admin app classic add-on in Discourse. So we had to do a few hacks to make it work. We had to temporarily convince it that it was a V2 add-on so that it didn't try and like pre-build itself. So like there's probably some things that we can do to make the code mod work on classic add-ons a bit better. And also if you wanted to be able to resolve uh uh components from the same add-on, and you also need to kind of convince it where they are from. And we already have a plan to add a function that you can provide to tell it where to resolve things from. I don't know if you want to show the naming function thing, Ed, as an example.
Oh yeah, sure. So the thing I was starting to show is these three arguments which control what files we're going to run on. These are also useful if you're trying to do a more limited thing. If you're just trying to test it on one or two files at a time, you can pass false to the parts that you don't want to match anything. If you don't want to do any routes or you don't want to do any render tests, and just match the ones you want to try on, that's useful. So this is just an explanation of what it is it's going to try to touch. It's not going to go into lib and find in repo one. The things Chris said are right about, like, there's probably some tweaks that would make it more nice to use in a classic add-on. The other thing Chris was talking about was the naming rules. So this is an option that lets you you can pass the name of a JavaScript module that has naming rules that you want to apply. And so this is for if you have opinions about when we import components and helpers and modifiers and we're going to invoke them, how do you want them named in your JavaScript? The default naming is pretty much fine. I think it does what I want. But if you have other needs, so the fact that we called, this helper became SVG capital JRAR, right? There were naming rules there that made that happen because probably this was SVG-jar in the old one, right? They needed to get renamed and there's rules about that. And so this is an example of like a full configurability hook. You can write your own module that has a function. And the one that this refers to is that actually gives you an example of how it has to behave. It's a function that, gets past the name, the way the component was invoked and the file it came from and all that, and it's supposed to figure out how to name it. So this is an example of like a pluggable thing that you can change. We would like to just do one also to customize the resolution itself. If you have, stuff that is very custom resolver stuff that, even Embroider doesn't understand, but where the component, if you have some special component, right, that comes from a build time transform or whatever, you could presumably tell the code mod where it comes from, so it doesn't stop you from using the code mod. We would use that kind of pattern where you could have a hook to customize it completely. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions?
Oh, hello. I posted one way back in the chat that I don't think has been answered yet.
I need to be a better moderator then. Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's also kind of semi-adjacent, but I remembered this question because Ed showed the test stuff. My question was whether or not there's going to be an updated reactivity story for local test state, or if we still need to use this.set or like a local class with tracked until like the cell reactivity kind of deal is ready.
Well, the thing I would usually recommend people do now would be to use one of the tracked built-ins. You could use a class, right? But if you do something like let state equals new tracked object, right? And this would be imported from tracked built-ins, right? Then you could just do things like refer to the state in here, state.thing, right? And then you can, like state.thing equals new value and await settled and assert that it's there, right? So those patterns, that's not a bad pattern. If you had cell, you could use cell there too. And then, it ends up not being that different. Like a cell is really just like a tracked object with only one thing called value in it, right? Like this is now effectively the same as a cell. So
yeah, I hadn't even thought of using tracked object for this. I've used all kinds of stuff, but not tracked object.
Yeah.
I don't know if I did something terribly wrong, but I imported tracked from tracked built-ins and just passed in a value to that as a function. I don't know if it's doing weird magic behind the scene or what it's doing.
It does some weird things
to work.
You can't just like do a tracked string by itself, right? Like that's not gonna really be a thing, I don't think. I don't know, does that give you a cell-like thing? I don't know. But if it does, you'd have to...
Yeah, that's what it did feel like a cell when I used it.
It might be
maybe not supported, but
that tracked from that add-on is quite different than the tracked from Glimmer tracking. That's the default one. It's not bad, but it's different, and that's a kind of a troll.
Yeah.
It does more. Like if you use that tracked on a property, it will actually try to make the value deep tracked. Or like, if you did with normal tracked, if you did this, it's shallowly tracked, right? If I replace the whole map with a new map, that's tracked. But if I change the contents of the map, it's not tracked. That's the normal behavior of like tracked from Glimmer tracking. If you get the one from the add-on from tracked built-ins, it will make this a tracked map. magically, which is a little too magic for my taste, but you know, maybe it's useful. So yeah. I saw a question about absolute path, why we preferred absolute paths. Well, or relative paths, I should say, right? Relative paths with extensions. Really just because it is the like most conservative thing to do in terms of Node support, how Node thinks about ES modules. Node itself is getting a little more relaxed moving ahead, so maybe they won't always require extensions. But it's just, it is kind of nice for the build system to not have to care about special resolving rules. If you depend on a file, you say the real name of the file, and that's all very simple and transparent. You can do other things for sure, and this is another good reason to have the customized resolving, because I could see reasons to have other opinions about how these get spelled. The two options right now are the explicit file relative path with file extension, or more like a traditional Ember, your app / components / create row with no extension, right? Those are the two things the code mod can generate right now. I could imagine doing other things too. You know, you can put stuff in the exports and imports keys of package.json, which, by the way, the add-on, the code mod actually adds an exports block while it's working like this, and it does leave it behind. I actually deleted it by accident when I reverted my other change to the package.json, but you know, using the exports and imports standards for package.json, you can do other things. So for example, if you want your app to be like a shortcut thing you can import from, you can do stuff like this. It can even have extensions. The problem with this, the main reason that this isn't even a default thing we're doing yet is that it's not very smart about extension search. So for example, I can do a rule like this. And what this would allow is now extensionless import of all JS files within my app. I could say stuff like app components, blah, and that will match a JavaScript because I said JavaScript here. But it won't, there's no way to make it like search for multiple types. So I would have to pick here which one I'm actually going to support and only get that, which is kind of annoying. There's no way to do a search priority in here. It's got to be one-to-one. So like you can get quite far by customizing the rules in here. And the nice thing about using these, right, is that lots of tools now support them. TypeScript, as long as you're on a new enough TypeScript with a new enough module resolution setting, understands all this stuff. Beat's supposed to understand all this stuff, right? Rollups supposed to understand all this stuff. So it's quite nice to use this standard to resolve those ambiguities about where you're importing things from. On the extension search part, though, it's intended to be very one-to-one mapping without a lot of searching around, and there's no fallback. So you kind of have to either pick that you're going to get one kind of extension for everything, and then you don't have to say it. But if you want there to be different extensions in your app, you're going to leave the extension off from the pattern and have to include it explicitly in the import, right? But you know, maybe in your app, your team wants to do things like have component star means app components star.gts. You can imagine that at least all your components are say they're all GJS files, right? So now I could just import from pound components, create row. You know, these are all conventions you could do. Of course, we could do a customized hook on the code mod would let you decide you're going to do this automatically. Or of course, this is stuff that you can also mod over time if you're going to evolve your app support. But yeah, I hope that some better standard for extension search may be possible in the future, so that we can have a more brief default output.
We do get a bit of that with the Beat support. We have a extensions array, do we not?
Yes, well, so Vite itself will search for sure, but that's also why the Vite app doesn't use an extension here, right? It just says map all the files, and then the search is left up to Vite itself, because Vite will effectively search through this map and be like, do you have a JS one? Do you have a GJS one? So bundlers can still, of course, apply search on top. It's just that if you tried to like actually use this system to do the mapping of the extensions, then you don't get the search done by the build tool. Node is really the one who's picky about this right now. A thing we really do want is for Node itself to understand that our files are ES modules, right? Which you could declare to Node like this. And you might ask, well, like, does Node ever run my front end code? No, not. But like, we would like that to work because we would like to be able to do server side rendering as an option and just natively make it work, right? So fast boot is quite different from that. That fast boot takes like your whole browser build as a bunch of bundles and then sticks on more stuff to override some things and then gets them run in the VM module of Node, which all makes it quite like difficult to build, slow to build, and difficult to debug. Whereas in principle, you should just be able to actually run your authored ES modules directly in Node when you want to do server-side rendering and debug them directly there. And to do that, we do like that's when you're going to care about following the standards more of how Node thinks about things, because you would be running totally unbundled, right? You're not going to use Vite to do extension search for you. So at that point, you got to follow the Node rules, and Node is probably going to want you to have the extension. But it's subject to change. I mean, you need a custom loader anyway to turn that GJS or GTS file into JavaScript, right? We will have that. So it's a question of what levels we have to hook into. I have spiked out Vite's SSR support, getting it basically working, but it did need me to really use these kind of really strict extensions everywhere.
Sounds like a great topic for another talk in another Ember Europe or otherwise. Okay, cool.